Hello and welcome to VisioCare Vision, the webinar series from VisioCare Services. My name is Nikki and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Alan Robinson. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Nikki. Good to see you.
Hi there. Yes, you too. I'd really like to encourage all the attendees this evening to get involved and pop your comments in the chat box, which is on the right side of your screen. So why doesn't everybody hop in there straight away and let me know where you're joining us from this evening and what position you hold in veterinary practice, whilst I run through Alan Robinson's bio. So Alan has been a veterinary surgeon in practice for over 20 years, a successful business consultant to over 1,200 practices worldwide, and a director of Vet Dynamics. His mission is reigniting purpose, passion, people, and performance in independent veterinary practices. His company, Vet Dynamics, works with independent practices to provide personalised support and resources for practice performance, business intelligence, leadership and culture, and team engagement. It's quite an impressive bio there, Alan. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you and I will see you all on the other side.
Thanks, Nikki, and thank you to VisioCare for this opportunity to share your audience and have this opportunity to talk about some of the things dear to my heart. Now, I've been told there's lots of really important football on tonight and that I've really got to crack on and get stuff done by 8 o'clock or 8:15 at the very latest. So I'll start on. Hopefully you can all see that, but this is the second in a series of webinars put on by VisioCare. The first one we looked at this 3 stages of a future ready business. So part 1 was who we are, and that focused on identity and values and culture. This one is going to be much more about how we operate. How do we need to function in a post-COVID future ready business? And then we've got a third one in January as well that's going to look at how we grow in that environment. So let's come back to this and see how we go. What we're predicating this on here is this current crisis we see in the veterinary profession. We're all very, very aware of the fact that you're actually here is amazing, and that we have this crisis of employment, massive over demand, massive under-resourced. And then we've got this crisis in that what we're seeing, and this is a longer term view, and this is just my opinion, that we're really becoming human resources in a competitive, production driven veterinary industry, rather than really the engaged, energetic contributors to that wider veterinary community of doing veterinary stuff, fixing animals and being vets and nurses. Beneath that, I think there's a real crisis of motivation. There's a lack of confidence. We're hearing a lot about imposter syndrome, the inability to value professional time. And for me, and what I know is motivation grows from people mastering and measuring progress, getting better at stuff. And we're not seeing that happening. We're seeing people step back from that, the edges of actually improving their own performance. Crisis of control, in the ambiguity, uncertainty, the difficulty of actually making sense of this world, be that COVID or even before that, unable to distinguish what we can control and can't control in this. And therefore, a total lack of autonomy and accountability goes with that. And we know the symptoms of that. Going deeper, a bit more existential, I think for the profession overall, there's a question around why we do what we do. And we're being questioned on the expectations of clients, being questioned on expectations of society, we're questioned on the expectations of our own team, leaders, etc. And there's a hunkering down into clinical skills, expertise, or profitability, depending on which side of the fence you're on, rather than really seeing the collective and personal legacy and purpose of why it's important to be a vet. Vets are really important people. And therefore, this is leading to that whole identity crisis in the profession. I think that is the key piece for me. And identity is based on your capability of turning up in this world, showing up, doing well, being in a state of what's called flow and trust. Flow in your own physiology and capability, being and performing at your best, and then trusting others to be the same. And when you're in that state, the world is full of curiosity, enjoyment, compassion, and really the intrinsic motivators. And that's my take on this, is that there's the missing pieces. Now that's deep and meaningful. How do we do something about that? What I want, just a quick question then. I'm going to question now the business model of really how veterinary business works. Just in the chat, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe that the veterinary business model works? Yes, it's fine, might need a few fixes. Or no, it actually is pretty well broken and isn't fit for purpose. Is the veterinary business model fit for purpose? So are we getting any comments? And yes or no is all I really want from that. What do people think around that question? Because I want to make sure I'm talking to the right audience, at least in this. So jump into the chat. Corrado, no, okay. You've been there, Renee, excellent. No, okay. Now I'm getting a little bit of echo chamber here, because I know a lot of these people, I've spoken to them before, but a few others there. Okay, one or two, they're saying yes, that's great, because they've obviously done something right with their businesses, a few adjustments needed. Okay, so we're going to get this range. Some people think it's okay, think it's working. Others, we're finding it's not working, or not working for them at least. And that's really what we want to work on from there. So thank you for that feedback. Yes, I know it's too simple. I know, I agree with you. I'd like to give you a range of options within that. But let's see how we go with this. If I can get back to my slides, that'd be good. Okay, so what we're going to look at, and this is a model that was presented by McKinsey & Co., big American consulting firm who look at this stuff in a global context, and they came up with this 9 imperatives, what they called it, to look at who we are, identity, how we operate, and how we grow. And like I said, I've taken this model, and my curiosity says, how does this fit into the veterinary context? How do we make this fit, or does it fit into the veterinary context, and what lessons have we brought from that? So it's just a lens to look at a very broad problem, but it does then focus down on certain key things that we can then take to heart. So what it came down to is who we are, and we looked at that last time: purpose, values, and culture. We're looking at this, how we operate, and there's 3 key things that came up with there. How we make decisions, how we actually make good, fast, easy decisions. What structures do we need to have in place to make those decisions? And of course, then that relies on the talent, the people we have to do those things, because decision making and structure aren't independent of the people in it. So it's people, process, and platform is really what we're looking for. And we're going to talk about these other things about growth in the next webinar as we go. So just to recap, if you were on the last webinar, you would have picked up a couple of things. Really important things around identity, as I mentioned, is the deepest existential issue where flow and trust come from. Is it's about purpose. People want to belong to something or be part of something bigger than themselves at work, in life, and all sorts of things. So practices that only fix on the narrowness of clinical care or profits will lose ground and not meet employees' needs. And I'm suggesting those needs are very much around affiliation, social cohesion, purpose, and meaning, those higher level need crises I talked about earlier. So how do we build that in, not just bolted on, is really what we're looking for here. So in that, I talked about purpose, why. I talked about values, the things we value about ourselves, our business, what we want the world to be like, and then culture, how we act within that, the activation of that. If you haven't seen that webinar, I suggest you go back and have a look at that, pick up on it. So what we move on to, once you have identity, structures, and thoughts in place, we can move on. So as far as the operating models go, I'm just going to move myself around a bit. In this modern world, because of the ambiguity, because of the change, because of the uncertainty, decisions need to be made, organized, operating models need to be fast, nimble, and this is the key word for me, frictionless, to creating an agility and a simplicity in the way we work. If you think about veterinary practice, it is not frictionless. It is full of lumps and bumps and barriers and difficulties and distractions. Basically, it's really, really difficult to work through a working day. Now, that's true of many businesses, but I think veterinary in particular has many aspects of that. Okay, now to do that, what we're also going to talk about is networks of empowered dynamic teams And I'm shrinking this down to a suggestion of how we reorganize our teams to make this work. And interesting, this is something we did in COVID already. So this is just a replay of some of the stuff we learned from COVID. So prioritizing speed, efficiency, effectiveness, not around making it mechanical, but much more making it around people, process, and platform. How do we build those things that actually support the people that we need to work with the best is what we're looking for. Now, the key question I ask in this is, if we're going to fix stuff, there's some good stuff in veterinary medicine, but there's stuff we have to fix. So at any of those levels, yes, the business model's okay, but there's stuff that need fixing, or more the contention, actually the whole business model seems to be somewhat broken. And we need to replace it altogether. Rather than successful things, what sucks? What sucks about the veterinary profession? Now, if I left that as the question for the evening and said fill in the chat box, I'm pretty sure we'd come up with a pretty long list of things that really don't work. And I've done that exercise with my mastermind group and another large industry group looking at this problem. We've come up with some interpretations of that. Now, some of this will be highly obvious to you, or you'll resonate with it in its own right. But what I've done is tried to package it so we can actually look through the process of how this works through. This image here, I have this thing in my business journey of we eventually get to the stage of what's called an octopus manager, which means you've got 8 arms trying to manage everything at once. Nothing is graspable and everything sucks, and that's really how you spend your time managing work within that. But anyway, that's another story. So number one, this is the basic business model that we need to fulfill. This is what we're trying to do in business. You'll recognize this from Brian Faulkner's Colorful Consultation, Colorful Business. It's the model we use in Vet Dynamics, is that we have a team culture trying to deliver client experience, a good client experience, that clients are happy and enjoying it. They're trying to deliver clinical resolution and get the patients better. So with clients on one side, patients on the other. Now, already you can see there's a tension within that model. And of course, doing that, we have to deliver a financial viability for the practice. We have to make money, because there's a tension there as well, because a lot of the team are not embroiled with the fact of making money. We've got to ask clients to pay for our services. We've got to recommend things that actually cost money to the client. So what we put in there, the keystone to hold this, is that we now try and teach you leadership and management skills. That's really important. You must come on these courses and learn leadership and learn management, and you will learn to manage the disparity and the confusion that this model engenders. But deep at the heart of this model is really hard to pull together at any point in time. And I'm guilty of having teaching this for years, and I've got lots of solutions to make this work, but it is a really, really difficult one to make work. Some of the key things in that is what I call the commercial paradox, the pet versus profit. You're in there, you're trying to fix problems, you're trying to work for the best for the pet. You're in practice expected to do everything you can do for the client and the patient welfare at any cost, but still work in this commercial model. You've got to charge for what you do. And we know the facts and figures. Some of that's right-sized itself through COVID, because we're just busier and busier, and we haven't spent that much money, so we actually have profit, but not for the right reasons. But this whole paradox of, I want to do this stuff for the pet, but I've got to ask for the money from the client, creates an underlying sense of fear, obligation, and guilt in us that keeps us in a state of fear, fight, flight. So we spend a lot of time managing that energy, and it's massively, massively distractive, and for the vets and the nurses and the whole organization. And if you look at any course, much of it is around managing that equation of fear, obligation, and guilt around money in particular. And so can we do something about that process? The fact of that business is the other thing that's come up, is that we're caught up in this busy trap paradox. The fact that we've made busyness a major KPI for practice. If I'm not busy, I'm not doing well. If I am busy, I must be doing well. And we've taken busyness on as in a martyrdom sort of way, as a badge of honor. But the honest truth is, and I can bear this out with facts and figures from our index and other things, most practices, most people are just too busy to make good money, to practice good medicine, to practice good customer service, or to actually look after their team and themselves, for that matter. And this is where the burnout and anxiety is coming from. Busy is not a factor that relates to profitability in any shape or form, okay? It's too simple for that. But busyness does directly relate to the levels of stress and out of flow that you and your team are within. So busyness is something we have to manage and control. And that might come around of closing your books or being more selective and other such strategies, which we can look at in another time. Behind that, we're expected to look after the client, look after the patient. We're expected to be highly compassionate beings. And to be honest, my experience is most vets, most nurses and receptionists are highly compassionate. We're in it for the animal's sake. But then the compassion and the empathy goes to the patient, the pet. But we kind of depersonalize away from the client, because that is really the hard work. And we have two choices. We either depersonalize, become professional, put up a professional veneer to protect our own compassion levels, or we get sucked into the client and the patient compassion and we actually do everything, do too much, etc. So vets with high levels of empathy, which many of you have higher levels of client satisfaction, which is what is being asked of you, but the cost of that is higher risk of poor mental health, stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. My take on this is empathy is killing us only because we fail to regulate between those two polarities. Okay, and that's what we never learn at university. We often don't learn that through life. Those of us that are here and doing okay, we've probably learnt that lesson eventually, but it is a difficult one, and it's getting worse as time goes on. And again, I'm layering this down, and like I said, this all sounds quite negative, but I see this day to day in my work. You all must see it day to day in your practices. Yeah, we've got to be skeptical, self-critical. We've got the scientific method asks us to be skeptical and to improve and carry on. However, within our temperaments, any levels of error, self-criticism, client challenge leads to a high level of anxiety and depression, which is this depersonalization piece who's driving that. So I've heard a lot about imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, and therefore lack of competence. We talk about new grads coming out that haven't got the wherewithal to step up or step into this arrangement, and it's a really difficult situation. And then even experienced vets are seeing this happening more and more as time goes on, and these are just symptoms. These are not the cause. These are symptoms of what we're seeing carrying on with this as we go on. That leads to one of the key things in this, and this is something that's come out more so through COVID, and the fact that it's been highlighted by the fact that you can put clients in the car park, separate them from building. A lot of people say the best thing that ever happened. This was a survey carried out before COVID, BEVA, BSAVA Recruitment Retention Survey, and they asked the question, what is the one thing you dislike most about being in the veterinary profession, to vets and nurses? And by far, the largest thing was clients. Okay, clients are the enemy is basically the contention, and that's backed very much up by what you read in social media, some of the forums, some of the Facebook forums. There's this ongoing narrative of, it's the clients that causes the problem. Now, this is a well-known social process that goes on when you've got social disconnect, when you get people disconnected from each other socially, and of course we've seen this through COVID as well, but in veterinary we are a very disconnected lot, and that's underpinned by a level of meaninglessness. And I've already highlighted that there's this imposter syndrome, lack of purpose, lack of legacy in the process. So social disconnect underpinned by a sense of meaningless, not in everybody, but even 20-30% of the population, and then aided by a sense of free-floating anxiety. There's something not right. We're just not doing this well. And of course, we can apply this to the current COVID situation, but I'm applying it directly to the veterinary situation, with or without COVID. Okay, and then that free-floating anxiety, which means I can't pin it on anything. I just know something's not right in my life, in my career, in my profession, or somewhere. And then that leads to a level of frustration and anger that we want to pin on something. Again, unless we can pin it on something, it ends up as a mass hypnosis. We all then look for a scapegoat within this, and there's various ones sort of predicated within this, and we see this ongoing. And again, I think we're seeing some of this with some of the COVID situation as well. So bring it back down, the graduates then we're producing, that is suddenly an issue in that are we producing graduates suitable for the current environment? Now, what I've just described is a pretty toxic environment. And so we're asking the universities, can you produce graduates that can tolerate that sort of environment? It's like asking canary hatchers to go, can you produce a canary that can go into a toxic coal mine? And that's what we're doing, and we stand back here and say, well, I did okay. I've sort of my way through it. I survived. Why can't they? Snowflakes and other such things sort of come out of this. But I don't think that's the problem. I think that there is an issue with the teaching curriculum. It's not teaching vets to do it. It is just mimicking the same situation, and it's feeding into that. But the attrition rate is just horrendous, massively bad. Within 3 to 7 years postgraduate, we're losing up to 50% of our graduates in this process. And so that's not working, obviously. My take on this is basically it's not our job to toughen up these graduates to face a cruel and heartless world. If we're going to have any effect at all, we've got to get back into the universities. Our job is to raise children, graduates who will make the world a less cruel and heartless place, is kind of the approach we've got to take. Now, that's a major, major step and major, major change in strategy in what we can do. So we're looking for a bottom-up process. Can we influence the curriculum in the universities? And that's a really tough question. And can we influence top-down the practices that are going to take them in? And we need to shift those two things in concert. And that's a huge ask for what we're trying to do. And we're going to have to find some solutions there. Just to finish this piece off, the other paradox that comes in is I graduate and then I've got two choices, basically, which is better than it used to be. I only used to have one choice. Okay, but now we've got two. I can go into a corporate practice, which does have its culture of command and control and infrastructure, folks, but it has career path. It has graduate academies, has support mechanisms, as good as bad as some of them are. But the whole business structure there is an exacerbation of the hierarchical model that I'm talking about here. They will need to focus on commoditization of product and service to scale and grow. That's the corporate model. Okay, yeah, they have to do that. But the question is this a conducive model for human engagement and high performance? Will this make that burnout worse, or will it make it better? So the corporate's got a huge responsibility to deal with that. Well, we could say, well, independents can do that very differently. We can individualize value, relationship, quality care, etc. But to do that as an independent, you've got to manage that first slide, those 4 disparate areas of finance, of client, of team, of clinical care. And you've got to get really good at that. And some of you I know on the call have done that and are doing that quite well. You're managing that commercial, clinical, cultural, and client mix reasonably well. But are you doing it without inducing burnout and stress? That's the question. And many really don't have that capability. So I don't think either of those options actually work particularly well in the current state. Some do, and there are a minority that do that. Pleased to know some of them. Then we're left with this whole current paradox: overwhelming demand, 3.5 million new puppies and kittens, critical lack of resources, 25% less vets that we had, at least 1 to 2 vacancies in every practice in the country, just about, and then skill erosion, time erosion, energy erosion is really what we're taking. Right, all give up, all go home. That's kind of it. We're not going to do too well in this, etc. But that's kind of my take of, is this business fit for purpose? My summation of that is no, I don't think it is. I think the whole current veterinary business model sucks, and I'll take some responsibility for maintaining that. But I think I've improved what we've got. If you pardon the expression, I've polished the turd to a degree. Okay, so we've got this central business that needs to be sorted. We've got client expectations, fear, anxiety, danger, and some of the aggressions come back. We've got deflated teams working under fear, guilt, and obligation of low flow, low productive capability, low expectations of themselves and each other. And we're trying to balance this equation here. So I'm really not too enthusiastic about that. So, Alan, what can we suggest makes a difference here? What can you come up with? So, this is a bit of a thought experiment. It's actually where it's in process, in reality, it's in place. But if we were to now imagine a veterinary business that is fit for purpose, what aspects would we want to be improving to say that that was true? What aspects of veterinary business need to be reinvented, fixed, taken? And like I said, there's some stuff that works really well, and there's other stuff that's not less so. This is my take on it, and I'll sort of put a summary of this as we go through it. And this is just touching on the tip of the iceberg. There's lots and lots of stuff in this we could work on. I think it's got to go right back to basic governance that feeds into a couple of things like psychological safety, like ownership, like engagement, quite clearly. I think we need to look at the organizational structure and roles and accountabilities within practice. Typically, it's a owner, founder-owned business and everybody else in the business. So the owners have full control of the governance and the wealth of the business, and everyone else is that. In corporate, obviously, that's more so. There's a external owner and everyone in the organization. And then there's a hierarchy, and that hierarchy typically and still is veterinary primacy or investor primacy or skills primacy is the key thing. So if you're the specialist, you're the top dog, basically. There's also a gender primacy in that is quite blatant in the veterinary profession. Okay, so there's got to improve some flexibility in that. We need what's here, new meeting formats, but new structures of making decisions that are geared towards action, eliminating over-analysis, stopping time, and just lubricating the process much more so. Within that, teams have more autonomy, and individuals have more say in the matter. I'm going to talk more about that in terms of the structures that we need to put in place. And decision-making, so we can evolve and grow and innovate quite clearly. And there's a total lack of innovation going on at the moment. It's hunker down and survive. I'll sort of touch on some of those, but these are not that difficult. Some of these things are in play at the moment, etc. As we move through this. So this is the underlying just basic structure of the business, the basic incorporation of how it works. And like I said, there's very few choices in at the moment. Jumping into that piece about decision making, this is one of the imperatives that I was focusing on, that lens I was talking about from McKinsey. COVID-19 made us make some really major turbocharged decisions. Lockdown, car park consulting, PPE, sending people on furlough. We made radical, and going online, using Zoom, using technology, all sorts of things that we would not have dreamt of a month before. So we know how to turbocharge decision making out of necessity. It's can we do that then without the necessity? So we need to embed that learning of the crisis and redesign that decision making process. Now, some of that was highly autocratic, but it was also, from what I gathered, highly informed. You tended to have a lot more meetings, a lot more discussions, a lot more putting forward an explanation, and you had to do the same for your clients. So you had to do it that way, and you did it well. You need to right-size the number of decision makings, okay? So reducing committees as such and finding critical voices, but that doesn't mean the boss has all the say. I want to remove founder or owner primacy or investor primacy in some cases, to the point of decisions need to be made by the best people to make those decisions. So participants should be purposefully included from whatever level of the business they come from. And those people usually with the clearest view of the decision are people most proximal to the problem, okay? So ask yourself, who is that person? Who has a vote and who has a voice? And how do we include that in the process? And these are holocratic. What we do know, and this comes from McKinsey studies, those organizations that make decisions quickly, as they did in COVID, generally make high quality decisions. There is an intuitive gut decision making process here. As vets, we overanalyze stuff. We are highly analytical and we get caught up in detail. And we don't make good decisions. We make protracted, painful decisions, etc. So those that did make decisions fast and well tend to outperform their competitors. They get ahead of the game much quickly. So that's kind of in the growth phase. We look at that as well. But it's not being afraid of making active decisions, but decisions you can change in the future as you go on. It's really part of this process. And there's systems to do this, which I'll come to in a bit. Top teams need to focus time and energy on the core business decisions. So there are layers to this. There are people at the top who have more experience, or you bring those people to the top who have got that experience, okay, and focus on core business decisions, financial decisions, marketing decisions, strategic decisions, and resource decisions, etc. are the key things. But they need to be lined up with what we called your value agenda. And we covered this in the first webinar. The value agenda is what is your driving principles now. And like I said, that has changed dramatically in the last 18 months. Okay. And that should be, it might be somewhat ambiguous, it's got to be made clearer. Okay. Leaders also need to spend time on deciding resource and talent allocation. So leaders aren't making, you will do this. They will make resource available and talent available as much as they can to the people who need to make the decisions. That's a major, major shift, okay? So if I want decisions made around marketing, I'll get my marketing team involved. I'll introduce them to people who can help them make that decision. I'll talk about budgets, I'll talk about resources, I'll talk about software, and then they are left to work on that with feedback built into it that way. So decisions should be delegated to the lowest level possible. When I say lowest, furthest down the chain, basically, give employees at the company's edges, where they're interacting with clients in particular, agency and accountability for those decisions, making sure they're well equipped, well resourced, and best placed to make those decisions. Okay. Interesting, most decisions process can be done in half or less the steps that it currently takes. Okay. You can wipe out massive parts of that decision-making process. And that's not just knee-jerking, that's actually a process to make that happen. So this is my typical organization chart. The owners, the primacy at the top, they're about strategy and planning, long-term growth of the business where they go. They have a say in that. Operationally, we should have a management or a leadership team drawn from the ranks. Someone from marketing, someone from finance, someone from clinical, someone from HR, someone from wherever you need them. And then the decisions are made at this circle levels here. That's where decisions should be made. And those decisions are informed by the culture, how we act and how we work around here. That culture is driven by the values. And it's also informed by the strategy from above. This is what we want you to achieve, guys. Help make the decisions that make this happen within the guidelines of your culture. And that's the balancing piece of this. And that's how we get good decisions. Really hard to do, but it's only a paradigm shift. It's because we're just so used to this centralized control at the top of this tree as we go on. Second part of this, then we need a structure for this to happen within. It's all right to say all that stuff about decision making, but if the structures aren't there to make this happen, we're going to have trouble. So these future ready practices and businesses need to be fitter, faster, flatter, and far better at unlocking considerable value. And that value tends to be in the people and the processes, but there's other forms of value as well. So we're not trying to get rid of hierarchy. We're not turning into sort of tree-hugging socialists, particularly, though that wouldn't hurt. We're trying to just use hierarchy as little as possible, but use a more organic organizing system, which I'll explain to you in a minute. So flattening the organization, which many veterinary practices already are, but they don't have any alternative to a hierarchy. So at fault, they jump into a hierarchy. Nikki.
Hi, so Martin Squires just wanted to ask, what if all of those departments are one in a small practice that you were describing in the previous slide, Alan?
That's a really good question, Martin. I can always trust Martin to come up with a good question, so thank you for that. Yeah. Can I hold that question, because I'm going to come to that in a second. So thanks for that. Hold that thought, but it's a really good question. In a small practice, you've only got 6, 8 people or 15 people, and we're a small business. Can you have that level of one hierarchy? Yeah, that's the easiest option. Can you have a level of ecosystem of teams within that? We'll have a look and see if that will help. Here's an important principle, and this falls outside of the McKinsey study, but this was something else, that if most practices have been predicated by improving performance. Now, this is a very subtle thought, really. Measurable performance is bound by the skill set of your team. Okay, so we tend to hire for skills. I want a vet that can do orthopedics. I want a nurse that can do clinics. I want a receptionist that can manage a PMS system. And then we try and improve that performance. And our KPIs, our key performance indicators, are measuring the performance of people and processes. Okay, but the trouble is skills are limited and finite. You can only get so good at something, and there is a limit to individuals, and there's probably a limit overall. Usain Bolt can do 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. Okay, the very best that anyone's going to do is probably 9.57 or something like that, unless there's some whatever goes on behind that. So performance is limited. Okay, if we shift our thinking to what does success look like, success is a different parameter. Success has a different set of things. This is where we go back to the values set. If we're acting and performing and delivering on our values, we can call that success. If we're acting and measuring on performance, we can measure that for sure. Much easier to measure, in fact, but it is limited. We're never going to get beyond a glass ceiling of some sort. But success is bound by networks, which means small groups interconnected together, and you can actually join as many. It's like cells in the body. You can connect one cell to another cell, or mitosis divides once, divides twice, divides three times. So you're forming a network of cells that is unlimited. In reality, it's as far as your imagination can take it. So success is an unbounded concept, which is actually what we need in the veterinary profession. Whereas if we're driven by performance, which is the typical base, and this is like if it's not making any sense, it's probably too subtle, or I'm not explaining it particularly well in that. But if we get away from measuring performance of people and processes and look at the success overall of the organic process we're in, of the organism, of the ecosystem, we can improve that, because networks are unlimited. And this is the trouble with ecological sustainability. We've broken down networks, we've broken down organic networks, we've broken down natural networks, and so we have an unsuccessful planet as such, even though we can measure performance in certain ways. Don't go there, but just remember that the key piece of that success is bound by networks. Networks are unlimited if you so choose. Okay, so the vision of the future, coming back to Martin's question, is organizational structure. If we don't want focus on boxes and lines, that's about performance. We want centers of connectivity. We want to connect to a central item, hub and spoke, if you want to say, is one way of looking at that. But it's more than that. There's multiple hubs, multiple spokes. And the connectivity is about people, who works with whom, who does what is a very important thing. Models that are designed, nurtured, and grown around people. So this is the important thing. Performance is around systems, success is around people, okay, is what we're trying to do. Their roles and responsibilities. What will help this a lot, and one of the big aids in this, is digital technology can enhance network structure. I mean, computers are a network. Anything in the technological world is a network of some sort. Okay, the internet is just a network of thousands and thousands of computers, and that is unlimited in its scope. And it's that, and I'm saying we build an internet. I'm saying we have to shift our thinking in the way we conceive our business. So I'm suggesting that the boundaries of our business don't end at the four walls of it, or even in the car park of our business. They extend well beyond that. And this is going to be one of the secrets of future successful practices, the networks that are built up in any shape or form. Now, you could call corporate a network, but they're not. They're just a bunch of practices that have been bought. They want them to be a network, but they're not, and they're far, far, far away from that. Okay, so digital technology is going to be a really important part of this. Networks of teams empowered to operate outside current structures. You've already done this. Remember in COVID, when you had the lockdowns and you had to keep people separate, you formed a vet nurse reception team, stuck them in a branch practice, or alternated them through your main practice, and they were autonomous teams working together, interacting with other autonomous teams, but not crossing over for social distancing, etc. My experience of that is it worked really well. For the clients, the patients, and the teams, etc. There were stresses in there, etc. So rethinking structure means rethinking teams. That's the critical thing to come out of this as we go on. So here's the thing. So here's the typical hierarchy on the left: the boss, vets, nurses, receptionists, or team A, finance, marketing, and HR is the typical way. And of course, we get this echo chambers of activity here. On the right is what's called a holocratic organization, where we have variable and movable teams. So I don't know about yours, Martin, but there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people in that group, and they could form 3 or 4 teams. Obviously, some people cross over in that. It just takes a way of thinking it through. And these are project-based teams. What do we want to have happen? What's the key thing? And those teams might be short-term, they might be long-term. They can work differently. And we're working on this in our own business to try and get this to happen, in that, trying to bring together teams. We have a marketing department, we've got an internal ops department, but the crossovers now through using technology is blurring those lines massively. So if that didn't answer your question, Martin, just put it up there again, we'll take it. So here's an example of that we're talking about. In a typical consultation, the vet is responsible for the clinical care, talking about the money, the compliance, making sure the client does what they're meant to do and gets all the products and service they need to do, and the instructions. And they're meant to be highly compassionate and looking after the client, the patient needs that way. That's a huge ask, and do that for too long, and in compassion fatigue, burnout, anxiety, stress all kick in. That is a key part of it. What if we divided those roles around? And I had this animated, but it's not working on this platform. What if the vets were responsible for the clinical in a compassionate way? What if the nurses were responsible for patient care and compliance, inpatient care, outpatient care, extended care, care into the living room? What if the receptionist or concierge or client care manager was responsible for the compassionate end of that, the communication, the empathy, understanding? Not to say the others aren't empathy, but it's not their main job, if you see what I mean. And my other suggestion is we take cost totally out of this equation, and we're suggesting, as some businesses are already doing, looking at subscription-based medicine, almost entirely driving the whole thing to subscription-based. So the money's paid up front, the money's gone, and we just got to do the business. Okay, you're doing this already with healthy pet clubs and pet schemes, and it works remarkably well. Some people including consultations, so they have less resistance to offering consultations, getting consultations done, follow-up consultations, because there's no cost barrier in the vet's mind, and that's really where it happens. So it's this ecosystem of care is what we're looking for there, to build these up. Okay, just to finish off then, what about team and talent? What do we need? What talent do we need? How do we attract it? And how do we manage it? Now, we could spend a whole webinar on this, but the key thing at the moment, as you all know, talent is scarcer than capital. It's scarcer than money. It's scarcer than anything in our business. And with that scarcity, it becomes the bottleneck to our business. We cannot proceed past that. So we're going to get quite creative around this. And it's not just working harder, picking up the slack. We've really got to get quite innovative and imaginative to solve some of these issues, because it's not going to go away any day soon. It's going to actually continue to go on. So you need to do a bit of an audit. You need to do a bit of a talent audit and a values agenda audit. You've got to find out where the main value is delivered in your business, because you can't deliver everything you used to deliver. So why don't we focus more on the 80-20 of the more valuable things? Now, just be careful on your immediate jump to conclusions and that. It may not be what you think. Again, McKinsey did research in bigger organizations than veterinary practice, but did some in healthcare, certainly. His research finds that substantial amounts of value in organizations linked to as few as 5 to 10 roles. Or things you do in which your business, many of which are not at the senior levels company, as in maybe it's not the vets who deliver most value. In actual fact, they deliver something, clinical care, but is that of great value than the client interaction or the team harmony or other such things? Leaders, you must do an audit on this. And one way of doing this is listing every process you do. And we're currently doing this with our group. We're going to list everything, and we list the resource it takes and the value it creates, and we can create a 2x2 matrix around that. And it's really, really interesting. I can't share too much of that with you now, but we're doing that work, and I will share that with you. Okay, most of us are wasting time on roles that don't deliver very much value at all. is the key problem. So if that's the case, that gives us huge opportunity to shift our focus on the things that do deliver value, that require far less resource, talent in the whole process. It's going to be really interesting how that comes out. The other thing to do is to rethink the forms of value, forms of wealth you create. Typically, we focus on financial, money, who put the money in, who's got the money, who's getting the money, where's the money going to. Intellectual, can you do this skill? Have you got orthopedics? Have you got a certificate, etc.? And manufactured, what bit of kit have you got? Have you got an endoscope, etc.? And they're the key things that drive us. That has shifted over the last 18 months, 2 years dramatically to there's more value in the human bodies that are there, the number of people, okay? So you want high quality people. The social networks, as we've already talked about, the networks you have within and without your business is going to be far more important in the future than your capability of coping with all this stuff, okay? And natural, the planet and the ecosystem and the world we live in is going to be critical to this as we go on as well, on a sustainability point. And what our system should do is take in all those forms of value recognized as such and enhance them and grow them and build them out that way. And your business will be differentiated on that process. Again, bit complicated, but it's just basically getting away from financial primacy, skills primacy, and equipment primacy to human, social, and natural enhancement. So they're balanced up at least within that equation, etc. And then from that, you figure out how do we act? How do we behave day to day? And this has become part of your recruitment process. Define the rules you live by in your practice, because this is going to be a critical employment decision making for new grads in particular, for older vets also, because the stories I hear, people are moving to places where they're honored, respected, and witnessed and heard and supported. Okay, and they want to know what are the rules to live by in this practice, and they will make serious career decisions based on that. One of those decisions might be to not leave the profession. So we have not just an opportunity here, we have an obligation to really find out if we can actually retain these people in the business, okay, and find the same joy and pleasure perhaps we're finding at the moment for some of us. How can we attract this talent? Very quickly, it's been, if you read and go pick up your latest vet record of Vet Times and look at the ads and says, lovely location, we've got endoscopes, we're going to give you this much CPD, we've got all the equipment, a well-supportive, friendly, loving team, come and join us, okay, which is important. No real values agenda within that. But what if you offered things like equity or ownership, okay, because that model's disappeared. Why can't we bring some of that back? And that might be employee ownership, that might be equity, it might be share options and other such things. Governance, do people have a say in the decision making? We've talked a lot about decision making. Do people, where do they fit into that decision making process? Are people being heard? I'm not saying they're ruling the business, but have they got any say? Have you got a structure that says you have a voice and I want to hear it, okay? Flexibility and family friendly. 82% of the veterinary workforce is female. 50 to 60% of those are millennial females of childbearing age with children. Okay, so there's a huge hidden reservoir of employable people that won't come to work because they won't get the flexibility and family friendly options that are there. Really important that we actually reconsider some of that to open up some of these reservoirs. Psychological safety, personal development, inclusivity and diversity. I mean, are you excluding people for race, for gender, for orientation, all sorts of things, subconsciously perhaps, but what's going on there, okay? Sustainability, ecologically, and then technology, okay? Are we enhancing that and bring forward? Don't forget the age group we're looking at, millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Zs, and Gen Is, are well into this. This is what they believe, want, and are requesting. So just a short list of things on that. Multi-stakeholder, typically it was the founders. I own this, I paid for it, I sweat equity, I built it, it's mine. And when I sell it, I get the money, see you later, thanks very much, is one thing. That doesn't build great confidence in me as an employee. Or it's a corporate model and there's an investor out there who paid well over the odds for that business, wants a return on it by reselling it somewhere in the future, maybe has a 7-year plan to grow the whole thing. But at the end of the day, you're going to take all that money and walk away with it. See you later. Thanks very much. Okay. I'm an employee, I'm a client, or I'm a pet. I have no say in any of that process. I feel existentially disconnected from the whole process. Okay. Some people just never want to be business owners, but they kind of feel they might have to be. So I'm suggesting we should rethink multi-stakeholder, very much so, how that works, and move away from founder primacy, investor primacy, from a way, and actually build a much more maybe socialist, maybe holocratic view of ownership that actually encourages employees to be part of it, customers to be part of it, other stakeholders to be part of it. How do we do that? Okay, how do we make that happen? You've probably seen Pennard's model, the employee ownership trust. It's an interesting model. This, unfortunately, a very cheesy photo of the boys and girls at Pennard's there, but it's not a particularly good photo. Common purpose, increase employee engagement, empowerment, future of the practice is certain. Hey, that's kind of giving me a different flavor of really what's available as a business. And I'm saying it's the perfect model, but it is a model and something to be watched and managed as we go on with it. Second peer to this is psychological safety. Do people feel safe, honored? Are they learning and thriving? Are they engaged and connected? Are they feeling worthy and appreciated? That's a big shift. And that's not just throwing a few yoga mats around the practice and putting bean bags in the staff room. This is a major shift in orientation, and there's heaps and heaps of work going on that will drive this whole process and take it through. So managing psychological safety is something that needs to be embedded in that process. To manage this, a few of the things I would suggest is, and this is a radical shift, we typically measure for performance outputs of caseload, outputs of client numbers, outputs of finance, how much money was made, average transaction. But we know all that. I measure those every day. I've got 126 KPIs that I measure on performance. What I'm also doing for myself and a few others was measuring some inputs. And if it's for my team, I'd want to know, are they getting their sleep? Are they eating well? Are they doing their physical exercise? Are they focused on things outside the business as well focused on things inside the business when they're in the skill set? They're taking some time in for themselves, meditate or breathing exercise. They're taking some time out sufficiently. They're getting home on time. They're shutting the doors and getting away. And that's really difficult in better practice. Do they get their playtime? Do they get their connecting time? And that's through feedback and connection. You can actually measure some of these things directly in the things. So the fact is, can we measure inputs to performance rather than the outputs of performance? And what we do know, these things are the basic 8 things of basically flow and trust in any organization. If we get to flow and trust, we can then start to build a stack of liberating human potential here. And so it starts at flow and trust, the basic physiological state of feeling okay in your own skin, not stressed, not fight, flight, not anxious or concerned or worried or burnt out. If we can get people to a baseline, and that baseline varies for everyone, but there is a generalized baseline in your practice, we can build on legacy and purpose. We can talk about autonomy and accountability. We can drive mastery and progress. We can get people engaged and energetic from that baseline. But those other bits have to build the baseline. And that's really the key to this as we go. To do these things here, there's tools available, vision orbits, CI boards, metrics and indexes, engagement processes, social activities, feedback, one-to-ones. There's a whole raft of things. They're all great. They only work above the line. None of them work below the line of flow and trust, is what I would suggest to people. Okay, so how do we build that business that builds a baseline? That's the trick. And at the end of the day, this was the other question they asked in that survey. What's one thing you most enjoy about being in a veterinary profession? I just want to treat animals. I just want to make things better. I just want to make them fixed and work. Let me do that. Take away all the distractions. Let that happen. Nikki, what were you going to say?
Hi, we've had another question in from Jolien. It's sort of reflecting a little bit back on an earlier slide from the presentation, but I'll pop it over anyway. So Jolien asks, should the universities change the criteria for student selection from academic qualifications to one that points more to the skills required?
What do you think, Jolien? Absolutely. Now, I would say all the universities are aware of this, but of course they're stuck in academic legacy systems, particularly around being sponsoring referral hospitals, sponsoring specialists, fostering people who do high level things. And then also the EMS. We know we had the big meeting at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons yesterday around EMS provision. How do we get change? From what I believe, the consensus was it really has to change. It's not fit for purpose. And I think the whole veterinary profession is poised, ready for change. And we can all point at the problems, and we've angst and wrung hands and gnashed teeth around that for forever. But we need to come up with a blueprint for this. And you're right, Jolene, that blueprint needs to start as students join the profession, even I would say even 2 to 3 years before that at high school, we need to have some influence. But the 5 years or 6 years at university need to be reconstructed. And I would say we're involved with working at the new Harper Keele University. They've just had their second cohort in there. I was up there for their open day. I'm really impressed with their curriculum. They're teaching them day one skills from day one of being at college. So they had them scrubbing up and putting on gloves and gowns. They had them auscultating dogs. They had them suturing latex skin in year one, day one. And they said, basically, you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life, guys. You better start now. And I was really impressed with that attitude and approach. Clinical. But equally, they have a clinical psychologist on the board, and they actually have the psychological safety net, but also it flips into a psychological performance enhancer throughout the 5 years. So we've got 5 years to work on these people to turn them into homegrown human beings that are capable of actually walking in. But we still want to push them over out of the trenches into the no man's land while all that other stuff is the problem. So we have to change practice at the same time, so it's a nicer and better environment for them to go into. That's the only way it's going to work. Top down, bottom up. So, Darling, yes, absolutely. Other universities want to make these changes, but find it very difficult to do so because of the legacy stuff, but they're going to have to do it over time. So, yes, I hope that answered your question. But yeah, brilliant question. So here's my model, and I'll finish off here, is we've got these three layers. We've got this business principles of equity, ecosystems, flattened hierarchy, learning organizations, and personal and people development is built in as foundational, as almost under the foundation, so you don't even know it's there. That's opportunities, because those things feed into, along with a lot of other interventions, psychological safety. I feel safe, secure. I'm in a learning environment. I can grow. I belong, and I'm in a community that has got my back, and I'm feeling trust and flow, and my self-esteem and self-worth is being fostered and built. So I have the competence because I've got the confidence to do that. And once you get to that's the baseline for me, those colored blocks. And then above that, we build human beings, build the business from there. And the business is around people who can perform, people who work with purpose, people who have autonomy and accountability within the frameworks we talked about. They master, progress, get better, and they have engagement and energy. And that's in then an environment, continuous innovation, diversity, inclusivity, sustainability, etc., all built into that. That's the model. We do have a massive blueprint to deliver this. I can't share it now. I'll probably share it in the next one we show you. But the work's been done to actually put this in place. And back to your question, Jolene, we're putting this in through the teaching hospital at Harper Keele. So that's really our challenge, our opportunity at the moment. So if that's of interest to people, thanks for bearing with me. We've just got to 8 o'clock there, Nikki. If people are interested in that and they would like to see how that can happen in their own practice, I'm going to do a little shameless plug for our Platinum Academy. We're revamping that and regrowing that to really reignite that purpose and passion and people and performance in independent veterinary practices. If you're in a corporate situation, sorry, can't help you. But if you are in an independent situation or looking to start up or looking to be in an independent situation, I'd love to talk to you. So get in touch at vetdynamics.co.uk, Services Platinum Academy. Come and talk to us. So on that note, Nikki, I shall stop talking.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan. Really very insightful. As an ex-practice nurse myself, a lot of what you've discussed actually really sort of resonates with me. I often wonder if the there's quite a lot of disconnect between the hierarchy of the teams. So it would be great to see much more integration, like your diagram showed, between the different levels, and trying to sort of explore the more diverse strengths within the team that aren't necessarily the sort of typical strengths that we maybe see for the reasons that people are employed. So really great. I'd love to invite the attendees to ask any questions. So if you have a question, pop it into the chat box there on the right hand side of your screen. And in the meantime, I would...
There's one or two coming in I think are interesting. Can I just grab those? I know we're going a couple of minutes over time.
Yes, of course.
Martin again says, I guess we've tried to encourage everyone to be flexible in all their roles depending on what is needed on the day. With support, maybe we expect a lot, but it seems to keep clients happy and by and large. But sometimes clients have high expectations, self-perpetuating conundrum of service and stress. That's my whole point. And many of you have put in strategies, capabilities to manage that, and you manage it and keep it under control, and you fall out of balance and you fall into balance and it works. But the model is just, why does it have to be like that is kind of the question. I know it's human nature is part of that. And you sort of make the point, maybe we expect a lot and sometimes, but it seems to keep clients happy. So there's this client primacy as well. And often we're sacrificing team capability for client happiness. And there is always compromises, I know. Can we change the model so that isn't so pertinent in the question is my point about this. So Martin, I'd love to have that discussion on that. So that's just interesting because it does sort of highlight the point I'm making. We're making not excuses, but we're rationalizing why things the way they are, and we're trying to do our best so we can manage that. I want to say, well, we don't have to manage that for the future. What if that wasn't the case?
Yeah, sort of shifting paradigms.
So someone has also, what have your experiences been with corporate versus independent? This is agnostic completely. This has nothing to do with corporate versus independent. I think corporates are trying to deal with the current situation in one way, independents are dealing with it in a different way, but they're both dealing with the same problem. And again, what I'm saying is let's take the problem away and then together we can actually do something about this profession. It's got to be agnostic of any of that polarities there is what I believe. Someone said, have you experienced imposter syndrome? Every day of my life. There you go. It's a given. Of course, everyone does. Kate Higgins got hijacked by a 9-year-old. Well, there's another whole issue as well. Going on with that. So.
Yes, we know about that one. Super. I'm afraid that the questions from the chat box have disappeared from my screen. Are there any others there, Alan?
Jolene's question must go for lunch. Again, you make a good point.
Yes.
I mean, it's just symptomatic of the whole thing. No, some really good questions. So I think we've covered most of those. If anyone else has got any, please get in touch. Happy to have the chat. And if you're interested in what we're building, take this forward as part of the Vet Dynamics community, I'd love to talk to people and get in touch that way. And once again, Nikki, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you also, Alan. It's always a pleasure to have you with us at VisioCare. And I'd love to take this opportunity actually to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, because we will not be back now until January, but we'll be back on the 26th to resume and conclude this webinar mini-series. We would love for you to all join us then at 7 o'clock, and we very much look forward to seeing you in 2022.
Brilliant. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. See you. Bye now.